I welcome you all to the module 6. Module 6 is about thinking and intelligence, and this is overall lecture number 16, and this is the last lecture of this module, that is third lecture of this module. So, today's lecture is titled as intelligence testing. So, we are talking about the concept of intelligence, and in that connection we will talk about the concept of intelligence testing, what are the different types of tests available and so on. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So, the last lecture was also part of the same module, and in that lecture, that is lecture number 15, we discussed the introductory and theoretical aspects related to intelligence. So, we discussed what is the meaning of intelligence, how do we define it. We also discussed the concept of nature versus nurture debate in the context of intelligence. That means, to what extent intelligence is determined by the genetics and to what extent it is determined by the environmental influences and so on. So, we looked into that, some of the evidences associated with that, and at the end we discussed the various theories of intelligence, which include theories of general intelligence, theories of multiple intelligence and so on. So, just to continue from there, today we will talk about the concept of intelligence testing. How do we test intelligence of a person? What is the meaning of intelligence testing? We will talk about some most popular intelligence tests that are available, like Binet-Simon Stanford Binet test of intelligence. We will also talk about the concept of IQ, deviation IQ. We will also look into the contemporary IQ tests. We will also discuss what is the difference between aptitude test and intelligence test. We will also look into the concept of the issue of validity of IQ test, whether they are valid or not. And at the end we will discuss some extreme forms of intelligence, like very low spectrum of intelligence and very high spectrum of intelligence, what some of the aspects related to that also. We will also look into some of the misuses of IQ tests that are possible. So, let us start today's lecture. Okay. So, the concept of intelligence testing is one of the most important applications of psychology, we can say. And psychologists have been debating about it, how to accurately measure intelligence, because measurement of a psychological trait or characteristics is not an easy thing, because there is a lot of issue of reliability and validity and so on. So, psychologists have long been debating how to accurately measure intelligence. Now, in this context, self-report measure is not a very good idea. They are very unreliable, because people's self-estimates of IQ show only modest correlation. So, if I ask someone to report about their own intelligence, obviously they can give a wrong estimates, they may not be even aware of the level of intelligence they have. So, the estimates of IQ is not a very strong correlates with the objective measures of intelligence tests. So, the self-report measure may have a lot of problems when we measure a concept such as intelligence, because people so there are many issues involved in it. So, individuals, so one thing is people may give biased report, they may not be even aware of the level of intelligence they have. So, in that context, individuals, for example, with lower cognitive ability often are most likely to overestimate their intelligence. A lot of people with low cognitive capability, or because of the lack of looking at their own abilities from a distant perspective, which is also called the metacognition. A lot of people may not be even actually accurately understand the level of intelligence they have. So, a lot of people overestimate their intelligence. So, there is a phenomena which is called as Dunning-Kruger effect, which this overestimation is explained by that. So, this overestimation may explain why some people perform poorly in academics and work setting despite believing they are competent. A lot of people may believe they are very competent, which may not be objectively true, but they believe it. So, that is a phenomena called as Dunning-Kruger effect, where people overestimate their level of intelligence than what is actually it is. So, people may not be able to actually report what is the level of intelligence they have. So, self-report measure may not be a very good idea in that context. So, the major issue, if you look at it, why people are not able to reliably report about their intelligence is one of the issue is related to metacognition, which means our awareness an understanding of our own knowledge. How much you are aware about your own knowledge and abilities, So, to look at yourself from a distance perspective, that you can also evaluate and look at yourself. What is my ability? What is my perspective of life? What is my status of knowledge that I have? Can you evaluate your own self also? So, that is the call. Thinking about your own thinking and abilities and cognition, so that is called metacognition, So, a lot of people have poor metacognitive abilities, which leads to which leads to a lack of ability to analyze themselves. So, people with poor metacognition or metacognitive skills often misjudge their competence because they do not know what they do not know. So, people actually, a lot of people, they do not know that they do not know a lot of things. So, that perspective, to look at yourself from another perspective, so from a distance perspective. So, that ability people differ. So, if somebody has lack of this ability, they may not be able to report what is the actual level of intelligence level they have. So, self-report measure has a lot of these problems in terms of measuring intelligence, because people may not be aware, people may be biased also. So, that is the issue with the self-report measure. So, to kind of overcome these issues, Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon, they tried to find solution around this, so that how to accurately measure intelligence. So, that led to the development of first intelligence test called Binet-Simon intelligence test. So, Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon recognized that intelligence cannot be accurately measured through self-assessment, and it requires systematic testing. So, just based on self-report and self-assessment will not work out. It needs a systematic process of testing and evaluating people's cognitive ability. So, their development of first intelligence test over a century ago revolutionized psychology and had a lot of far-fetched implications of that, which we will look into that. So, Binet and Simon work fundamentally changed how individuals are selected for education, employment, military service, influenced schoolings and social policy, reshaped how people understand their own abilities. The modern history of intelligence testing therefore begins with their pioneering contribution. So, that was the first proper systematic intelligence test developed by Binet and Simon, and that they used proper objective measures of intelligence, so that we get an objective assessment of intelligence of person, and it had lot of implications in selections, in education, employment and so on. So, this test has been used in various contexts. So, this was the first true intelligence test developed by Binet and Simon somewhere around 1905. So, it was based on the idea. So, what was the basis of this test? That if performance on specific task improves with chronological age. So, as the age of a child increases, certain cognitive abilities also increases, certain performance in certain task also increases. That is a natural outcome of development. Then such performance can be used to distinguish more intelligent individuals from less intelligent ones within the same age group. So, if something needs to improve as per age, that can be an important indicator that whether someone has higher of these abilities and lower of these abilities. Based on that, we can understand what is the level of intelligence in a certain age group. Binet's goal was practical. Their goal was very practical, to identify dullest students in the Paris school system, so they could receive remedial assistance. So, initial aim of developing this test was that they wanted to shortlist based on this test students who are little dull and they are not doing good, so that there can be remedial assistance can be given to these students. So, they can screen using this test. He and his collaborators tested children labeled as bright or dull by teachers, keeping only those tasks that bright student could complete, but dull student could not. So, based on certain task performance, they develop this test, so that they can distinguish which bright from the dull students, and then it can be used in certain remedial assistance and so on. This process, this whole process actually led to the development of this first formal intelligence test, which was capable of distinguishing between children of different intellectual levels across different age groups. So, that test was able to determine the differences between the bright and the dull student and so on. So, what kind of things were included in those tests in the Binet-Simon test? These were typically a lot of these cognitive abilities that they kind of tested, different mental functions such as memory, attention, concentration, comprehension, reasoning, judgment, language ability, perceptual skills and so on. So, there are different tasks given around a lot of these dimensions, and based on the scores in these dimensions, the intelligence score was calculated. So, basically using this test, they were calculating something called as a mental age. Chronological age is given, but using this test, what they are doing is they are trying to calculate whatever the score they get from this test, they were calculating mental age. So, this test introduced the concept of mental age, which is defined as the age level at which a given performance is typical or average. For instance, if the average 8-year-old answer 45 items correctly, then anyone achieving the score would have a mental age of 8, regardless of their actual age. So, if certain performance is expected of a certain age group, if anyone scores that, then their mental age is of that age. So, if let us say average 8-year student, 8-year children answer 45 items out of whatever the number of items correctly, then anyone who scores let us say 45 items correctly, their mental age will be 8. So, this is how they were calculating mental age. So, assigning mental age gave a general indication of a student performance level, but failed to allow fair comparison across different ages. So, this was okay in terms of finding a mental age of a certain age group, but this led to problem in terms of comparing children of different age groups. So, we will see what was the problem. For example, what was the problem? For example, an 18-year-old performing like a 20-year-old might seem as advanced as a 5-year-old performing like a 7-year-old. So, let us say there are two set of children or student we are comparing. One is 18-year-old and another is 5-year-old. So, let us say in those tests an 18-year-old performed equivalent to let us say 20-year-old individual. Okay. So, that means that person is ahead of 2 years ahead in terms of performance. 18-year-old is performing as per a 20-year-old. So, that means the person is ahead of his age group 2 years ahead in terms of mental age. Similarly, let us say a 5-year-old also performing like a 7-year-old. So, again here the case is the 5-year-old is ahead of 2 years. So, apparently it looks like both are similar in terms of intelligence, because both are ahead of 2 years from their age groups. One is 18 years, but is able to perform like a 20-year-old, another one is 5-year-old is able to perform like an 8-year-old, 7 years old. So, both are ahead of their age 2 years ahead. So, this test will calculate only their mental age, but the problem is actually the later one. So, this 5-year-old performing like a 7-year has a greater relative intellectual advantage, because at the lower age group the growth is much faster. So, if a 5-year-old is performing like a 7-year-old, then that children has more intelligence than an 18-year performing like a 20-year-old, because in the initial stage the growth is much faster. In the higher age group, the growth almost remains stagnant. So, this issue was not captured by the concept of just mental age of at that time. So, to resolve this issue, the issue was resolved later by developing IQ score and deviation IQ score. So, basically this is how historically the concept of intelligence, measurement of intelligence evolved. So, it started with the mental age, but the problem with the just mental age was that across different age groups we are not able to compare, because the issue was as the age increases the development becomes slower, but chronological age is increasing. So, we are not able to capture that developmental issues of slower rate of progress with later age group. So, to resolve these issues, people develop something called as an IQ score. So, then emerged the concept of IQ. IQ means intelligence quotient. Intelligence quotient in short term it is called as an IQ score, which considered both mental age and chronological age, the ratio of both mental age and chronological age. So, it is not only just calculating mental age, but it is trying to kind of calculate the ratio of both mental age and chronological age, and trying to find in terms of 100 score of 100 what is their their score. So, just before World War I, German psychologist Wilhelm Starr in 1912 introduced this concept of IQ, and the formula for IQ is this. So, mental age by chronological age multiplied by 100 is IQ. Now, if you take the earlier issue of mental age, where 18-year is performing like a 20-year and 5-year is performing like a 7-year, the issue is resolved. How it is resolved? Let us see. So, let us take the same case. What will happen? If you calculate, an 18-year-old with a mental age of 20 would have an IQ score of 111. So, if you put this score, so mental age is 20, chronological age is 18 into 100. So, this comes up as 111. The same formula let us use for a 5-year-old with a mental age of 7 years old. So, mental age is 7, chronological age is 5 into 100. So, the IQ score comes out with 140. As we said, this child is actually more in terms of intelligence, because at that time the growth is much faster, and this formula is able to capture this. So, the intelligence of 5-year-old performing like a 7-year IQ score is 140. It is more as compared to an 18-year-old performing like a 20-year whose IQ score is 111. So, using this formula we are able to capture this issue of some of these differences across age group. So, according to this formula, a person whose mental age equals their chronological age will have an IQ score of 100. So, let us say an 8-year is performing like an 8-year. So, IQ score will be 100. So, if mental age is same as chronological age, the score will be always 100. So, if someone's IQ score is 100, that means the person has intelligence as per the age group. So, it is same, neither very high nor very low. So, it is as per the expectations of the age group. So, 8-year performing like an 8-year child, so the IQ score will be 100. If it is more than 100, that means the person is ahead of his age group. If it is less than 100, that means person is behind the age group. So, that is the idea of IQ score, and this mental age is calculated by using this standardized IQ or intelligence test like Binet-Simon test and so on. Okay. So, those with mental age lower than their chronological age, they will score less than 100, and if they score higher than 100, that means they are above higher mental age than whatever their chronological age is. Now, although this formula worked reasonably well for children and adolescents, up until adolescence age this formula works fine. But one of the major issue with this formula also was that the mental age stops increasing significantly after about age 16. After around age 15-16, generally the mental age becomes very stagnant, then it does not grow very fast. It almost remains stagnant. There will be some changes, but then chronological age is increasing. Every year your age is increasing, but your mental age may remain very stagnant. So, if you use this formula, then the IQ score will be going down and down with higher age group, but still the person may be very intelligent, So, while the chronological age continues to rise, this would make adult IQs decline with age. It will look like the person's IQ is decreasing with the age, but which may not be the case, because the standard is like this. After a certain age group like 15-16 years of age, generally our mental age remains very stagnant, does not grow very fast, very slowly it grows, or many times it becomes stagnant. But that does not mean the person's intelligence is decreasing, because this is same for most of the people. But chronological age is increasing. So, what will happen as per this formula? So, this is increasing and this is almost stagnant. So, IQ score will keep decreasing. So, someone who will score very high, let us say 100 30 at the age of 10, the same, let us say same mental age remains same and chronological age increases. In their 30s and 14, they will score below 100 and so on. So, it will look like they are becoming less and less intelligence, which may not be the case. So, this is another issue with the mental age, that after adolescence generally the mental age does not grow very fast and many times it remains stagnant, but chronological age keeps increasing. So, this formula will not be able to capture that part also. So, there emerged another concept which is called as a deviation IQ. So, what is deviation IQ? To fix this, modern intelligence testing uses deviation IQ, which was introduced by David Wessler, who is one of the pioneer in the field of intelligence and intelligence testing. So, deviation IQ measures a person's performance relative to age based norms, where an IQ of 100 represents the average score. Scores above or below 100 reflects how far an individual deviates from the age group. So, deviation is used, like for every different age groups certain norms are calculated, norm score. So, now it is not dependent on the just mental age and chronological age. So, for every chronological age group certain norms are calculated. So, if a person in that age group performs as per the norms, then their IQ is 100. If they perform better than the norms, they will be more than 100 and so on. If they perform poorer than the norms, then their IQ will be less than 100 and so on. So, now it is as per the age group norms. So, it will not be completely decided by just your chronological age and so on. So, mental age, if it is remains stagnant, then it will remain stagnant for all the people. So, they have calculated certain norms, and based on that norms comparison, people calculate IQ scores, which is called as a deviation IQ score. Now, this sorted most of the problems of IQ, the mental age issues and so on. Now, this Binet-Simon test was further developed in other part of the world. Soon after, Binet-Simon introduced their intelligence test in France. So, this was developed in France, the first test. Lewis Terman of Stanford University adopted and translated into Stanford Binet IQ test. So, in US, in the Stanford University, Lewis Terman developed kind of translated the same Binet-Simon test that was developed in the France and kind of adapted it a little bit, and it was named as Stanford Binet IQ test, which was published in 1916 and still used today, and I think the recent version is 5th edition. So, a lot of revision has also happened. So, initially designed for children, this one Stanford Binet IQ test, initially it was designed for children and later expanded to adults. The Stanford Binet includes a range of tasks similar to those used by. So, the tasks and the dimensions that are used to measure intelligence were very similar to that of Binet-Simon test. It included things like vocabulary, picture memory, object naming, sentence repetition, following commands and so on. So, those kind of typical cognitive abilities are tested also here. So, Terman's key contribution also, he also introduced the norms which help to find deviation IQ, that the baseline score representing general population, allowing comparison of an individual's performance to that of others in the same age group. So, he also developed norms at that time. So, this norm reference approach made it possible to determine whether a person's intelligence score is above or below the average and by how much from his age group and so on. So, modern intelligence tests continue to include these age based norms. For example, for adults like 30, 54, 50, 55, 69. So, certain age groups range norms are calculated for certain range of ages like 30 to 50 or 54 and so on. What is the norms and so on. So, that is what deviation IQ we discussed about, So, based on the norms of certain age group, IQ scores are calculated. Now, let us look into some of the contemporary IQ tests, like in today's world, what are the most popular IQ tests available. Still, most of the tests that are developed in today's world also basically comes from those initial tests only. They are only the revised version and so on. So, modern intelligence tests still retains elements of Binet's original design, though the test has been extensively revised with the time and so on. So, the one that we just discussed was Stanford-Binet intelligence scale, still used. Stanford-Binet intelligence scale, it is now in the 5th edition, means 5 times it has been revised. Includes age appropriate tasks. Young children might copy figures or answer questions about daily activities, while older individuals solve analogies, interpret proverbs, identify similarities. So, the tasks are age appropriate and so on. For children there will be different tasks, for adolescents there will be different, for adults there will be different tasks and so on. So, the age appropriate tasks are there in this test. The Stanford-Binet is administered orally and includes verbal and non-verbal items. So, it includes both verbal as well as non-verbal items in terms of task and so on. So, examiner begins at a level the person can handle and then increases the difficulty. This is how it is done. Start with a level where the person can do it, like easier items, then slowly the difficulty increases until a test taker can no longer answer correctly. So, based on that the mental age is calculated and so on. From the patterns of responses, the examiners calculate the IQ scores and identify subscores that reveal the person's strengths and weaknesses. Subscores, like the IQ test has many sub-dimensions, as we said, like let us say vocabulary, and so on. So, we for example, we discussed, so these are the things like vocabulary, picture memory, object naming. So, these are sub-dimensions. There can be separate score for all this also. So, one can get a profile of scores in the different dimensions, and overall they will calculate IQ score. Another test that is very in the contemporary context, it is used very commonly, is David-Wechsler scale, developed by the David-Wechsler. So, in the US the most widely used tests are David-Wechsler scales, which also has both children and adult versions. The Wechsler adult intelligence scale, 4th version for adults, and Wechsler intelligence scale for children, 4th version. So, so they have separate tests for children as well as adults. Both assesses verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, processing speed and so on. So, very similar to, like, content are very similar. Because these tests require individuals one-to-one administration, they are very time consuming and resource intensive. So, these are very time taking tests because there are a lot of items and one-to-one it is done. So, it takes a lot of time and it is very resource intensive kind of tests. So, to address this issue, people also developed something group based IQ test, where it could be at a time administered to a group of people, which are paper and pencil based and allows efficient large scale testing. However, group tests have drawbacks, certain drawbacks. They include fewer questions types, may reduce motivation compared to personal testings, and may be unsuitable for very young children and individuals with low IQ scores. So, in a certain context group based tests can be used, but then these are more like made little less intensive because it has to be implemented in a large group, and so in terms of questions the numbers of questions will be less. In a group based test the motivation may be less because it is not one to one, and people with low IQ scores may not be able to understand and may not be very efficiently able to capture their scores because it is done in a very general context and so on. So, there are certain limitations, but again one to one is very time consuming and resource intensive kind of test. So, in many contexts group based tests can be used, but this may have certain drawbacks as compared to the one to one intelligence tests. So, today the IQ test remains one of the most psychological, most famous yet controversial achievements. It is very famous because it is widely used everywhere. The IQ tests have shaped a lot of things, selection processes everywhere, in the schools, in the jobs context and so on. IQ test has been widely used, but there are certain controversies associated with it, whether it is accurately depict, whether there is a cultural issues. We will look into some of them, some of the controversies associated with it. So, in 1989, the American Academy for the Advancement of Science recognized it as one of the 20 greatest scientific accomplishments of the 20th century. This development of IQ test and intelligence test, it is considered as one of the greatest scientific accomplishment, because this has a lot of relevance in the real life context, measuring people's intelligence differences, which is used in various contexts. So, regardless of one's view, IQ testing has had a profound and lasting influence on psychology and society. While many versions of IQ test have been developed over time, only a few major ones dominated modern intelligence tests. So, many tests were developed, but only few tests still dominates, and in terms of reliability and validity. These tests are like Stanford Binet test that we discussed, Wechsler scales, both adult and children. These are like most widely used and most reliable and valid tests used. Some aptitude tests are also used for screening purposes in the colleges and so on, such as SAT tests. They are little different from intelligence tests. We will look into that. Some tests are also used to measure infant intelligence and so on, but so these are like some of the things which are mostly used in today's world in terms of measuring intelligence. So, commonly used adult IQ test, as we say, is commonly used is Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. It was developed by David Wechsler, who is a Romanian born psychologist who had once been labeled feeble minded by early flawed IQ test. He himself was like using some of the earlier tests, he scored very less on them, and he was considered as a feeble minded or dull minded, and he realized though a lot of these tests are actually flawed. So, he developed his own test, and which become one of the hallmark of intelligence test. So, the current version of Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale is fourth version, which was developed in 2008, includes 15 subtests that evaluate a broad range of mental abilities such as vocabulary, arithmetic, spatial abilities, reasoning about proverbs, general world knowledge, and so on. So, this test provide 5 major scores, like so there is an overall IQ score they will give, then there can be sub scores on verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, processing speed, and so on. So, people have separate score for all of this also, and there is an overall score which is called as an overall IQ scores. Among this, verbal comprehension primarily reflect crystallized intelligence, like you acquire knowledge about them with the passage of time that we discussed in the last class, while perceptual reasoning, working memory, and processing speed mainly reflects fluid intelligence, which are like ability to solve and process information. So, we discussed this model of crystallized and fluid intelligence in the last lecture. For children, commonly used IQ tests are like Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children, Wechsler Preschool and Primary Scale for intelligence. So, even within children also there are certain different scales used. For preschool there is a different test. For general intelligence test for children little above the age is also used. So, Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children is again, it is also fourth version now, is designed for older children and adolescents. So, it is little older children and till adolescence this is used, while Wechsler Preschool and Primary Scale for intelligence, this is the third version now, assesses younger children aged 2.5 to 7 years. So, for different age group, even within the children also the different tests are available. Both tests are adaptations of the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. So, it is based on that adult test only the items are modified as per the age group. It is tailored for the development level of a certain different age groups and so on. Now, we discussed, so there is something another group of tests which are called as an aptitude test. How are they different from the intelligence tests? Now, a lot of these aptitude tests looks similar to intelligence tests, but their objectives are little different. So, intelligence test measures a person's general cognitive abilities. So, it is about a very general abilities that we have, cognitive abilities, mental abilities. Intelligence test captures the general cognitive abilities like problem solving, memory, and this kind of thing. So, it is a very general thing. On the other hand, aptitude test assesses person potential to learn and develop specific skills of a particular job or task. Aptitude tests are very specialized tests or very specific direction oriented test where it tests potential to learn specific skills in a specific domains of job and tasks. So, they are designed for specific job and tasks, not for general intelligence. Intelligence tests are for general mental abilities. Aptitude tests are for more specialized specific job and task, whether the people have the understanding about those jobs and tasks. So, aptitude tests are used. So, unlike general intelligence which reflects overall cognitive ability, an aptitude test is a specific capacity for learning particular skills or talent such as mechanical, artistic, musical ability and so on. So, aptitude tests are designed to measure narrower and more specialized abilities than intelligence test. Special aptitude tests predict success in a specific field such as clerical work, computer programming and so on. So, for different fields there are specialized tests developed to understand ability of a person to whether they will be able to perform better in those tasks or not. Sometimes the multiple aptitude test assess several types of ability which may be very similar to intelligence test and so on. A well known aptitude test which a lot of people may be aware of is scholastic assessment test, which is also called as SAT test, which evaluates language, maths and reasoning aptitudes. A lot of colleges use this test for selection of the students and so on. Other professional entrance examination, a lot of these entrance tests that we see for engineering, medical, law, business and so on, these are all aptitude tests, because they are looking at your knowledge and ability to shine in a particular career or particular job context. So, they are designed to understand your ability to perform in a particular type of task. So, medical test will look into whether the person will be able to understand the medical related concepts and so on. So, this test evaluate those tests. So, all these entrance tests are like aptitude tests. They may not look at very general kind of intelligence tests. There may be some aspect of those tests which may look at general intelligence, but they are mostly aptitude tests. So, at the broadest level, general intelligence test measures wide variety of mental abilities, serving as the most comprehensive form of aptitude assessment test. So, but intelligence test is not designed for very specific purposes, but very for general and intelligence. So, this is just summarized form of the difference between intelligence test and aptitude test. So, this is for general cognitive abilities, this is for specific skills, aptitude test. Intelligence tests are for current intellectual capacity to test it out. Aptitude tests are future potential. So, for example, if you look at this entrance test, so they are looking at your future potential. Can you shine or can you do better in a course that you are likely to test in the future? So, that is mostly future potential are tested. Intelligence test measures inherent intelligence. Aptitude test predict success in a specific role and subject. They try to predict whether that person will be able to succeed in a particular role or particular career or in a particular job. So, those are like aptitude test. Now, the question comes, are these IQ tests that we are talking about, general intelligence test, are they valid? Do they really capture the essence of intelligence of a person? What is the validity of this test? Do they actually measure intelligence of a person? So, that is the meaning of validity. So, this is one of the area where a lot of debates are there, lot of people have been debating about this issue. Psychometricians generally agree that IQ tests are valid tools for measuring G or general intelligence factors. Most of the psychometricians, they believe that they capture the general intelligence of person. So, if you remember, in the last class we talked about different types of theories of intelligence. Some theories are related to general intelligence. That intelligence is the G factor, that human intelligence, either if you are intelligent, generally you will be intelligent in most of the things. So, there is a general factor in it. Some theories believe that intelligence are multidimensional. So, there can be different types of intelligence depending on the abilities and so on. That people may have musical intelligence, people may have body kinesthetic intelligence, people may have mathematical intelligence and so on. So, These tests, IQ tests that we look at, are mostly focusing on the general intelligence part of it, the G part of intelligence. Some of the research shows the predictive validity or probability of succeeding in academics, how it is predicted by intelligence test. So, predictive validity is about validity to forecast future performance. Do these tests are able to predict future performance of a test? The research shows that IQ correlates about 0.50 with academic success in high school and colleges. So, that means there is a decent ability to predict. It also indicates intelligence contributes significantly to achievement, but intelligence is not the only factor obviously for success and so on. There are many other factors, but it has a potentially good predictive validity. The IQ score can predict the future success and so on. Obviously, the other factors are also important like motivation, curiosity, effort, mental focus and so on. In terms of job performance also, IQ score are able to predict the job performance. Higher IQ predicts better job performance. Average correlation is again 0.50 across many occupations. Stronger correlation in mentally demanding professions. So, the professions where there is a very strong demand for mental activities, then IQ score is actually better predicts the performance in those. So, there is a decent evidence for predictive validity and the validity of IQ test, that they are able to capture certain criteria which are like which should be theoretically predicted by intelligence are generally predicted by those tests. Now, Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books suggested that beyond a moderate IQ level, intelligence may not be very strong predictor of achievement. A moderate level of intelligence is required. Beyond that, it may not be very good predictor of achievement. However, research shows that may not be true, because no cutoff point research has suggested that okay, this is the cutoff point beyond which achievement is not predicted by IQ. There is no such thing. IQ continues to correlate with life accomplishment even at a very high levels. So, research seem to show that higher IQ scores, as it increases, it also keeps predicting the higher accomplishment and so on. Now, let us talk about the issue of misuse of intelligence test. Since this score is used for a lot of practical purposes, selection and so on, there is a possibility that some people may misuse it also. So, even Alfred Binet, who was the first creator of intelligence test, who was the creator of modern IQ test, warned against the misuse of, or cautioning that if a teacher or a parent set low expectation for children with low scores, let us say some children score very low in the IQ test, what will happen? The teachers or the parents may automatically, they will have very low expectations from those children, and that is a problematic part of it. And the problem is, it could create self-fulfilling prophecies, means children labeled as dumb may lose confidence and underachieve as a result. Since people who get these scores and they feel that these children has low score, the people around them will have low expectation from them, and they themselves will lose motivation and confidence. So, low expectations will lead to lower performance. So, that is called self-fulfilling prophecy. Higher expectation leads to higher performance, because the children automatically understand that particular teacher is expecting higher from me, that children will automatically put more effort and motivation to fulfill their expectation. If their expectation is low, then automatically the children also understand what is their expectation, and automatically their performance also goes down. So, that is the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy. So, this can be a problematic part if you just stick to very strictly, rigidly follow the IQ score and so on. Over reliance should not be there. So, over reliance on IQ score is also problematic. While IQ test can predict certain things like academic performance, they are not perfect predictors and should never be the sole criterion of placing children in special education. This is one of the important indicator, but this is not the only indicator of a performance of a person in academics or any other things. So, this should be used judiciously, that this is an important indicator, but not the only indicator, and the decisions should not be based on only this particular test score, because there are many other factors involved in the performance of a person. So, a proper evaluation should consider a child's cultural and linguistic background, adaptability to the school environment and so on. So, there are many other factors. Sometimes children may perform poor because of lack of adaptation and so on. Certain cultural barriers could cause them score low in a certain test, because these tests are developed in certain Western contexts. So, there are a lot of issues that we should be careful about before making a very rigid judgment based on the IQ scores, because that is the only one aspect of things. We should also not forget about the other aspects. So, this IQ test have also been criticized for cultural biases. So, that has also been another controversial part of it, that these tests were mostly developed in the westernized world. Children, for example, outside the white majority culture may be unfamiliar with lot of these types of questions and knowledge test questions by which the knowledge is tested. These are typically Western kind of questions or ideas from their cultural perspective used. So, children from other cultures may not be familiar with lot of these questions. As a result, they may perform poorly. So, that is another controversy where a lot of these white black issues emerged in terms of schooling, selection in the school and so on. So, a lot of this controversy happened. To address this, psychologists have tried to create something called as a culture fair test that rely on non-verbal, visual, spatial and reasoning tasks where there is no cultural influence will be there. There will be minimum influence of cultural factors. However, these are less predictive of academic success, because this only looks at just processing ability and does not look at the knowledge aspect and so on. So, they did not predict academic success so much. So, they tried to develop something called as a culture fair test, but they were not very predictive of academic success, which in the Western context depends heavily on the language and the learned knowledge and so on. So, moreover, it may not be even actually possible to design a truly culture free IQ test, since conceptions of intelligence are shaped by cultural values. The concept of intelligence could be shaped by the culture itself. So, to develop a culture fair test which is relevant for every culture may not be even actually possible. At best, psychologists can develop culture reduced rather than culture fair or culture free tests. At least that influence could be reduced as much as possible, but may not be completely possible to remove influence of culture in a test. Now, let us look at that. We have discussed the concept of IQ and the scores, what is the meaning of scores. Now, based on the scores, there can be extremes of intelligence, like some may be in the lower spectrum, some may be at the higher spectrum. So, when we look at, let us look what is the what do we see in the extremes of intelligence? Extremes of the IQ scores. So, the IQ scores follow a normal distribution, means they form a bell shaped curve. So, normal distribution basically means the shape will be very like this, bell shaped curve. Most of the people will be here average, very few will be in the extremes. So, that is the bell shaped curve. Okay. Majority of the people will be in the middle, average score. Very few will be either very low or very few will be very high scored. So, that is the most of the phenomena are like they use something called as a, we find them in the population level normally distributed. So, IQ scores are also normally distributed in the population. Most of the people will be in the average category, very few will be in the very low and very few will be in the very high IQ scores. So, mean score will be around 100 with standard deviation of 15 and so on. Okay. So, that is the majority of the people's score would be fall into that. Approximately 68% of people score within one standard deviation of the means from 85 to 115 the score. So, let us say average is 100 score. So, 15 deviation means 15 minus 15 plus. So, 85 to 115. About 68% of the world population, their IQ score falls into this range. About 95% of the population score is within the 2 standard deviation. So, that is 30 minus 30 plus 30. So, that is 70 to 130. So, about almost most of the people will fall into that category, 95% of the population. Only beyond this, whoever falls are extremes of they will be categorized under extremes of intelligence. So, about 2.5% below 70, and typically they are categorized under extremely low intelligence or maybe some kind of intellectual disabilities and so on, significantly below average, and 2.5% above 130, they will be considered as gifted or super intelligent kind of people, gifted, very high intelligence. Plus 130 like genius category or super intelligence or gifted kind of people. Below 70 will be like some kind of intellectual disability, and those kind of issues may lead to such kind of very high extremely low score. Mostly it does not, normal population does not come into that category. So, this distribution pattern reflects how intelligence scores are spread across the general population. So, this is how it is shown. So, this 85 to 115 is 68%, 70 to 130 is 95%, and this extreme 2.5% above 30 will be considered as genius or like highly super intelligent category, and this will be below 70 will be considered very low, typically intellectual disability category. So, we can call them as intellectual disability. So, this is the kind of spectrum or patterns of distribution in the population. So, intellectual disability, as we typically people who score below 70 IQ score, or the average is 100, if somebody score below 70, then generally they come under intellectual disability category. So, according to Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, intellectual disability is characterized by deficits in intellectual functioning that begin in childhood and are accompanied by impairment in adaptive behaviors or skill needed for independent living. So, they are not able to, there are a lot of functional deficits and so on, impairments in adaptive behaviors, deficits in intellectual functionings. So, prevalence is about 1 to 3% of the population score somewhere around 70 and below 70 in the IQ test, these people score. So, generally to receive such a diagnosis, obviously there are specialized diagnosis tests are there, which also must show difficulties in adaptive functioning apart from intellectual low functioning, such as managing money, reading schedules, handling personal care or maintaining employment. So, there are a lot of this adaptive functioning problems and so on. So, these are the people who are generally considered under categorized under intellectual disability. On the other hand, people who are called as genius or gifted are those who score 130 or above in the IQ scores. So, gifted or genius refers to individuals at the upper extreme of the intellectual ability, typically representing 1 to 3% of the population. So, individuals with intellectual giftedness score 130 or above on the standard IQ test, 2 or more standard deviation above the mean. While genius lacks a fixed definition, what is the meaning of this? It is generally refers to blended exceptional intellectual and extraordinary creativity. So, here the definition is typically based on the IQ score, but who is genius and not genius, there may be different conceptions around it, but this is how totally based on the IQ score, how people are considered as somebody as genius or gifted based on these IQ scores only. So, people may have many other definitions to that also. So, these are some of the things around the concept of intelligence testing. So, with this I stop here. So, this was like briefly about the different aspects of intelligence and intelligence testing. So, thank you.